Group leaders, the moment is finally here. We are so excited that Greater Than is just about to start. And next week, you will have your group sitting down with you for the first time to actually watch one of the videos that we've shot and to have the conversations around Greater Than. This is going to be an amazing 8 weeks. Not only for you, but for the people in your groups. And we really, really are excited, partially because we think that this is going to do wonders for the church. Jesus prayed at the very end that we'd all be one, just as he is one with the Father, so that the world would look at us and understand something more of God. And so all of us getting better at our relationships is great for kingdom reasons, because our witness gets better. But for selfish reasons as well, because relationships touch every area of life. Your work relationships, your home life, the success you have in both business and ministry and everything in between is governed really by how well we do relationships. And so aside from the kingdom reasons for wanting to get this right, they're just good old-fashioned selfish reasons for wanting to have better relationships that go well. And Jesus says that our salvation can work itself out into every area of our lives. That's what we were looking at last week. That in the area of love, we can start to love better and better. We can start to love in a way that looks a little bit more like 1 Corinthians 13. And so this is going to be the journey of doing that. You're going to facilitate a bunch of people having a bunch of conversations to start to reprogram the way they have relationships. And the first thought for you as leaders is that you are not doing a small thing. So don't settle for little Sunday school type answers and a few kind of aha moments. You want to really be pushing yourself and your people to have a whole different toolkit. Since reading this book by Danny Silk, Keep Your Love On, and working on this content, I found myself consistently in situations where I end up saying, oh wow, I was about to react like a victim, but now I know that I can react like a powerful person. And a powerful person controls themselves and doesn't have to control someone else, and so I can say no and cope with the consequences because I'm loved by God. Or I can say yes to that and follow through because I knew that I chose it and I don't end up blaming someone else. So often I find myself with different words to use, different language, a whole different toolkit. It really is a bit of a paradigm shift. And so that's what you want to be pushing for. Ask God to let this sink into your own heart so that you can have conviction about pushing people to having a whole different toolkit, so we don't end up playing victims or rescuers, diving in to help people who actually ought to help themselves, so that you don't find yourself in a pattern of behavior where you think you're being a very good, gracious person, but you're bitter the whole time. And I get to stop doing stuff that I don't want to do and start saying no when I mean it instead of saying yes when deep down I mean no. And all those kinds of skills that we're going to learn. So we're going to do relationships better at the end, and we're going to do them better because there's going to be a whole paradigm shift. Jesus says in Luke 7 and Matthew 12 that out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth speaks. So these tools would be useless if some heart change didn't really happen. And we get to live and breathe out of the love of God. If I'm not convinced of the love of God, I won't be secure enough to say no and deal with the consequences of you withdrawing your love from me. If I'm not convinced of the love of God, I won't have the resources to keep loving you even when you're not giving back what I hoped you'd give back. All of this stuff relies on us receiving massive love from God and having our hearts get absolutely settled on that. And out of the overflow of the heart, the mouth is then able to speak in powerful, self-controlled ways. And so that's the whole reason why we're doing this. And this is why this is so exciting for our church, for you personally, for the journey that you're going to take your people on. Right, let's look at week 1. Next week, when your group sits down, they'll have listened to the first of the sort of official preachers of the Greater Than series. And the whole way through, you'll see that the content matches the flow of the preachers, but the preachers will sort of stand by themselves, and your course needs to really follow on from the previous week in your lounge. So don't get too freaked out if the preach ever so slightly goes in a different direction. The two are going to run parallel as opposed to sequential preach, then life group thing, then preach, then group meeting. Your course runs separately. So you'll have heard a preach opening up this idea of powerful people, and that's what you're going to be talking about. So on week 1, it really does mesh quite closely. And I suppose the first question is to figure out what a powerful person is. And you need to have quite clear in your mind that a powerful person is a person who takes responsibility for their thoughts, their decisions, their emotions, their behaviors, the resources of their lives. They take responsible for the good stuff they have to spend on whatever they want to spend it on. I'm going to spend my time on you. I'm going to spend my money on that. I'm going to spend my energy on this cause. Powerful people realize that they have responsibility over those things, regardless of what the world around them is doing. And so I don't get to play victim. I don't get to say, well, I'm cross all the time because I'm forced to do this thing that I don't feel like doing, and it's because they keep asking me and I can't say no. Well, I made a choice. I could very easily have said no. There would have been other relational consequences, but I'm a powerful person, perfectly loved by God. I could have said no. If I've chosen to say yes, it's because I've made a value decision. This is what I want to sow my life into, and then I shouldn't complain. If I've decided that that's no longer something I want to sow my resources into, I get to stop, put a boundary in place, and move somewhere else. This relationship has become unhealthy, I'm going to end it. This conversation has become disrespectful, I'm going to end it and say, I'll continue this conversation with you when you're prepared to speak to me in a respectful way. This person that I've been helping with finances not only doesn't appreciate it, but doesn't seem to be using the finances as a springboard to start making better decisions for themselves. I'm not sure that I'm doing this cheerfully and willingly anymore, like Paul commands us to. So I'm giving a little out of guilt or out of compulsion, or I'm free to say no. I'm going to put boundaries in place. A powerful person takes responsibility. A powerless person abdicates responsibility and blames, often with really heart-rending stories. And so in this discussion, you're going to be trying to help us realize that all of us actually end up being powerless people from time to time. You have been powerless. I have been powerless plenty of times in my life. So what we want to avoid is typecasting these two extremes and saying there are some powerful people and there are some powerless people. There are some people who take control of their lives. There are other people who play the victim. Because then, not only do I sometimes discover I'm a victim, I'm now told that I'm part of the half of the population that suck and it's my own fault and I'm supposed to fix it. No. That wouldn't be a helpful conversation. So we all have to realize that all of us are powerless. Often. All of us behave in powerless ways. All of us seek to blame other people or control other people or save them from their mess because we love being the rescuer and it makes us feel good to be needed. All of us are powerless in that we try to control others or allow ourselves to be controlled. And we need to figure out how much God loves us so that that love from God can drive down the anxiety and fear in me that causes me to do these powerless things and sets me up to live free. That's the conversation for tonight. So don't typecast the two extremes. All of us bounce between the two, and we want to start living more and more powerfully. What you'll need to do in this session is to make absolutely clear what triangulation is. At this point, I actually don't know if it's going to be in the video that you play or not. So I'm going to give this to you so that it's clear, and then if it's in the video, great, you can springboard off the back of it. If it's not, you get to sound like the psychological genius. Triangulation works like this. When I find myself in a powerless state of mind, I will look into the world for a bad guy, someone out there who can be blamed. Sometimes it's God, sometimes it's my parents, sometimes it's my boss, sometimes it's that person that cut me off in traffic who is just so incredibly inconsiderate and drives a fancier car than I do, and I start to paint a whole picture about how evil they are and how nasty they've been to me. And I'll have my bad guy, great. That means I don't have to take responsibility for my own road rage, for the weird prejudices that are popping up inside me, and all it's their fault. They behaved so badly. I'm the victim. I need someone to fix it. And so I get home and I go and rant on Facebook and ask some other political party to come to power and wipe everyone else. Or I ask some other family member to drive with me in future and take care of my problems. Whenever you recruit a bad guy to take responsibility for your problems, the next thing you do is recruit some rescuer to come and solve them for you. Road rage maybe isn't the perfect example for what the rescuer does, but this often happens in marital relationships where I come home raging about my boss. My spouse hears how bad my boss has treated me and says, well, I'm going to phone your boss. I'm going to sort him out. I'll write the email. I'll go into battle for you. Oh, shame, that person suckered you into a bad investment and you've lost all your money. Oh, that's terrible. Well, I'll loan you some and go sort them out. Versus, wow, that sucks. I'm so sorry you're in that bad situation. What are you going to do about it? Because that's what victims hate to hear, that I can actually do something about it, that maybe I made some bad choices that got me to this place, and I can make some good choices that will get me out of this place. So triangulation looks like that. There's a bad guy, there's a rescuer, and there's me with no power at all. And if any of us can figure out how we've been playing those roles, sometimes diving in as the rescuer and sometimes crying out as the victim, and all the time pointing to these fictional bad guys who, big point, don't actually exist, then we can start to see how we've been powerless in our own lives. And God has said there are no bad guys. There are evil people, there are people who make mistakes, there are people who make bad choices that affect my life, but I get to choose whether I stay in a relationship with them or not, and I absolutely get to choose how I respond. I get to choose what I allow to go on inside me. I have stewardship of my heart. That's why Proverbs tells us to guard our hearts. I have stewardship of my heart. I can decide how I'm going to respond, if I'm going to put a boundary in place, if I'm going to avoid you in future, if I'm going to give you some feedback on what your mistake has done to me. But I'm not a victim. I don't need a rescuer. greater is he who is in me than he who is in the world. I don't need some other person to come and save the day. Right, that's the conversation. That's what you're talking about. So you've got a pack that you'll have had emailed to you with the questions in there. I trust that makes sense to you. You're really working towards this idea that I end up often abdicating responsibility, but I'm a powerful person. I can take back responsibility. If you can get that done, you've done brilliantly. As your evening concludes, the second question that you asked was for people to think of 3 relationships in their lives where they have either engaged in a rescuer type thing, trying to control someone else's life, trying to force them to make better decisions, or they've ended up as a victim and they've allowed someone else to control them and they're now blaming this person. They'll have thought of these 3 relationships that have these powerless, sort of insecure dynamics going on. And at the end, question 4 says, what would you need to do to become more powerful and less controlled or controlling? I suggest you call their attention back to those 3 relationships. And you're going to ask them to spend a bit of time soul-searching, going, what might I implement during the course of this next week in those 3 specific relationships that's likely to introduce a little more freedom and a little less fear and control? Freedom for myself to respond in different ways, freedom for this other person to be themselves and not have to be controlled by me. Don't ask them to say that out loud. It's far too early for that. Just let them just think in their own mind what they might do differently. Then pray for them and then end on a happy note. This is week 1, so please don't try and dredge up too much deep, dark, terrifying stuff. This should feel like there's a light-hearted tone, there's loads of optimism, we're learning some new skills that are going to help us to do relationships better, and people will be skeptical. Can I really extend freedom to others? Give up my control and this goes well? And you're going, hey, hold your questions. This stuff's going to start making sense the longer we go along with it, but give it a fair shot. That's the tone. Enjoy, God bless, have a wonderful first week prepping for this and then facilitating that evening. If you can say very little and get them talking lots, you've done excellently, so that's what you're aiming for. Cheers.